Am I the asshole for cutting off my family after they left me in the hospital and went on the vacation I planned? I used to think family meant showing up, not just for birthdays or holidays, not just when it was convenient, but when life turned chaotic, when you were bleeding and scared and everyone else was too wrapped up in themselves to notice. I lived in a modest two-story house in Riverside, California, with my cousin Mariah, her husband Jason, and their 2 kids. I wasn't on the lease, but somehow I ended up paying most of the bills: electricity, water, internet, groceries, school supplies, half the rent at first, then more when Jason's hours at the warehouse were cut. And I told myself it was temporary. Temporary became years. Years became the life I quietly carried while everyone else floated through theirs. I was the responsible one, the one everyone leaned on when deadlines loomed, arguments flared, or plans fell apart. I became the buffer between chaos and sanity, the person who smoothed schedules, paid bills on time, made sure homework got done, dinner was hot, and everyone got to work and school on time. I loved doing it at first because it felt like purpose, but over the years, my love began to sour, replaced with exhaustion I didn't dare voice. And slowly I realized that the sacrifices I made were invisible, assumed, expected. Mariah leaned on me constantly. Jason expected me to fill gaps. The kids treated me like an aunt without realizing it. The small tasks piled up: arguments I mediated, errands I ran, schedules I coordinated, bills I paid. Everything I did became routine, unquestioned, unnoticed. I told myself it was fine because family, because love, because responsibility, because someone had to hold the house together, and I was good at it. Too good, perhaps, because no one else seemed to try. So when everyone started complaining about burnout, stress, or needing a break, I decided to plan a vacation. Not a small weekend trip, but a proper escape. La Jolla in San Diego, rooms with an ocean view, breakfast overlooking the waves, tickets to the zoo, whale-watching tours, restaurant reservations, all the deposits paid, itineraries double-checked. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted them to relax while I carried the stress quietly in the background. It was, in my mind, a gift, a thank you for surviving years of chaos, a chance for them to breathe without me silently holding everything together. They were thrilled, posting countdowns on Instagram, Mariah calling nonstop, Jason saying I was a lifesaver, the kids bouncing around asking what they could bring, what they could do, how long before we left. And I smiled, nodded, reassured them, pretending I wasn't running through every detail in my head, checking hotel confirmations, printing tickets, making sure car rentals and insurance were squared away, making sure every single moment would go smoothly, as if my own body and health didn't exist outside the plan. 2 days before the trip, I was driving home from work on the 91 freeway, traffic heavy, brake lights glowing red ahead, mind racing through the checklist, thinking about whale-watching times, breakfast reservations, travel time from Riverside to La Jolla. When it happened, a car in front of me slammed on the brakes. I hit mine a fraction too late. Metal screamed, airbags exploded, my head snapped forward, and for a moment the world went white, loud, chaotic. Then nothing. I woke up in a hospital in Orange County, bright fluorescent lights stabbing my senses, monitors beeping steadily, a nurse checking vitals, a doctor explaining a concussion, internal bruising, that travel was impossible, that rest was mandatory, that my body needed care before anything else. And the first thought that hit me wasn't about my injury, it wasn't about the pain, it was about the vacation, about the plans I had made, about the family who was counting on me. Because in the moments of crisis, I realized, as I lay in a bed with an IV in my arm, that for all my work, for all my sacrifices, for all the quiet labor I had carried, I might be entirely alone. I sent a text to Mariah first, careful, simple, direct. I'm okay, but admitted, I can't make the trip. Her reply came quickly, casual, detached. Wow, that's scary. Keep us posted. That night, no call. Next morning, nothing more. Just one text from Jason. How are you feeling? Not great, but stable, I responded. A thumbs up emoji came back. That was it. By the second day, the silence felt heavy, like lead pressing on my chest. I opened Instagram, scrolling absent-mindedly, and saw it. Mariah's story at LAX, coffee in hand, Jason grinning, the kids bouncing, captions like vacation mode and best family trip ever. The very trip I had planned, Deposits paid, itineraries finalized, now theirs to enjoy while I lay in a hospital bed, alone, ignored, abandoned. And I thought, am I the asshole for feeling like I've been completely forgotten? Day 3, the nurse asked gently, "Has family visited?" I shook my head, embarrassed, ashamed, frustrated. I had hoped they would be there, hoped they would care. But no, they had gone without me. The first call from the billing department came shortly after. They needed paperwork from my emergency contact to process discharge support. They called Mariah, she had refused, told them to handle it with me because she was out of town. That was the moment it hit me. They hadn't just failed to show up, they had stepped completely aside, removing themselves from responsibility, leaving me entirely alone. 4 days into my most vulnerable situation of my life, I realized for the first time that the people I called family had chosen their convenience over my care. And that's where it ends. The foundation, the tipping point, the moment before confrontation, the moment before separation, the moment I knew everything would change, the moment I understood that love, if unbalanced, could feel like betrayal. I got discharged from the hospital with a stack of prescriptions, bandages, and a list of things I wasn't supposed to lift, move, or stress over. But as soon as I walked through my apartment door, the silence hit me like a punch. Everything smelled the same, looked the same, but it felt alien. The echo of absence was louder than any alarm or monitor beep. I unpacked my things slowly, each bruise, each ache, each scar a reminder that while I was fighting to survive, my family was on the beach I had planned for us. I checked my phone again, instinctively hoping for a call, a text, a single word beyond what I had already gotten. And of course, there was nothing. Mariah's last reply, still casual, distant. "Wow, that's scary. Keep us posted." Jason's thumbs up emoji still sitting there like it meant something. I felt heat rising in my chest, anger sharp and hot, betrayal burning through exhaustion, and I thought, how can people I called family choose themselves over me like this? The first days were a blur. Doctor's appointments, refilling prescriptions, heating up meals for one. Small tasks that suddenly felt enormous. I realized I had to do everything alone. And it wasn't just the physical work, it was the mental weight. The constant awareness that the people I had held together for years were enjoying the vacation I had planned for us, while I was lying in a hospital bed, alone, scared, invisible. My friends started checking in, dropping off groceries, flowers, little gestures that reminded me that not everyone let you down, but it didn't fill the emptiness, didn't erase the hollow pit left by those who should have been there. I sent a text to Mariah after a few days. "I got home safely. Can we talk when you're back?" No reply, nothing, and the pit in my stomach twisted tighter. I wondered if I was overreacting, if I was being dramatic, but the image of them laughing by the ocean, the kids running through the zoo, Jason holding a coffee cup like nothing had happened, replayed over and over in my mind. The answer was obvious. This wasn't an accident, it wasn't thoughtless, it was a choice, a decision to prioritize convenience and fun over me, over someone who had carried their lives for years. I blocked their numbers, muted social media notifications. I needed space. I needed to feel what it was like to exist outside their expectations. The first week alone was jarring, quiet, broken only by the sound of my own thoughts. I screamed into pillows, I cried into blankets, I paced the apartment, angry, frustrated. But slowly I started to notice something strange, a lightness underneath the weight. The absence of their chaos gave me a space to breathe. I cooked meals without managing arguments. I cleaned without directing anyone. I made lists of things I actually wanted to do, small things, mundane things, but mine. I started sleeping a little better, moving without the constant mental load, and even though anger and grief still coiled tight in my chest, I realized I was reclaiming something that had been stolen from me for years. By the second week, a message came from a mutual friend. "Mariah asked if you're okay, she's worried." I didn't reply. My fingers hovered over the screen, the urge to explain, to justify, to beg for acknowledgement rose like bile, but I swallowed it. I couldn't let them pull me back into a cycle where my love and effort were assumed, expected, invisible. I decided to focus on myself first, recovery first, clarity first, and each day I repeated this. Small steps, coffee on the balcony, quiet dinners alone, walks around the neighborhood, texts ignored, photos unseen. Slowly, the first layer of control returned. I realized the story wasn't over, it was just beginning. the betrayal still raw, the anger still present, but I was starting to see the line, the boundary, the point where I would no longer allow anyone to define my worth through absence or convenience. And I knew that when the confrontation came, when they tried to reconnect, I would be ready, not desperate, not hurt beyond repair, but clear, calm, and unshakable. This wasn't the end, it was the middle. The part where I decided I mattered more than anyone else's comfort, and for the first time in years, I believed it. It wasn't long before Mariah and Jason made their first real attempt to reconnect. A text to my phone, tentative, careful. "We want to talk when you're ready." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering, remembering the hospital bed, remembering the photos of them on the trip I planned, remembering the quiet fear of being abandoned. My chest tightened, my anger flared. But I didn't reply, not yet. I needed to see if they understood the gravity of what they had done. A week later, Mariah showed up at my apartment unannounced, flowers in hand, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jason hovering behind her, the kids clinging to him. I didn't move to hug them, didn't reach for anything familiar. I just let them stand there, watching, as if the act of showing up should prove something. Mariah spoke first, voice soft, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, I should have stayed. I should have been there." I shook my head, cold, sharp. "You went on a vacation I planned, left me alone in a hospital bed, ignored every message, every call, every thought that I was scared and in pain. This isn't about an accident. This is about choice." Jason tried to interrupt. "We didn't know." I cut him off, louder, firmer. "You knew perfectly well, and you chose yourselves over me, over everything I had done for you for years, over what I needed, what I deserved. Do you understand that?" The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet breathing of the kids, the air thick with tension. Mariah's eyes filled with tears, Jason's jaw tight. The first time in years I let the truth between us exist without smoothing it over, without mediating, without fixing. "I needed you," I said, voice shaking slightly, "and you weren't there. You were gone, and now you're here asking for forgiveness like it's a casual favor. But this isn't casual. This is my life, my trust, my boundaries, and you've tested them in the worst possible way." The kids shifted nervously, and I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about teaching them what real care looked like, showing them that love without presence is meaningless. Mariah tried again, desperation creeping in. "We'll do whatever it takes. We'll make it right." I looked at her, cold but firm. "There's nothing to fix right now. The first step is understanding, proving you can be here when it counts. Until then, I am stepping back. I need space. I need boundaries. I need to heal without being pulled into cycles of neglect." And for the first time, I saw it in their faces, the understanding, or at least the pause of recognition, that this wasn't something I could simply forgive with words. The air was heavy, thick with all the years of unacknowledged labor, the moments of invisible sacrifice, and I felt the first strange lightness of control, the power of setting the boundary and standing firm. They lingered for a few minutes longer, awkward, unsure, then left, the door closing behind them like a punctuation mark. I slumped into the couch, exhausted, angry, relieved. For the first time, I realized that being firm didn't make me cruel. It made me human. It made me someone who would no longer be invisible. I spent the next days reorganizing my apartment, paying bills without mediating anyone else's schedules, cooking meals without directing anyone. And with every small act, every boundary enforced, every refusal to let them dictate my worth, I felt a strange, powerful relief. Messages from friends, phone calls, texts from people who actually showed up filled the quiet, and I realized that family could be chosen, could be earned, could be present. I didn't hate them, not completely, but I understood clearly that love without action, care without presence, is meaningless. I decided then that whether or not they returned fully into my life, I would not be the same. I would not allow abandonment to define me. The anger was still there, simmering, but it no longer controlled me. It became a tool, a lens to see who truly deserved a place in my life, and for the first time in years, I felt the strange mix of grief, relief, and clarity that comes from realizing you are no longer at the mercy of someone else's convenience. The weeks after the confrontation were strange, heavy, and quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar but necessary. Mariah and Jason didn't reach out again immediately. The silence, a constant reminder that my boundaries were no longer optional. I focused on rebuilding routines for myself, cooking meals I wanted, not meals they expected, paying bills without mediating their schedules, cleaning without wondering if anyone would notice. Each small act felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been assumed away for years. The anger simmered, yes, but it was no longer a weight pressing me down. It became a shield, a lens to see clearly who truly deserved space in my life. Friends became my pillars, showing up with laughter, support, and simple presence, a contrast that hit harder than I expected. I began traveling alone, short trips at first, walks along riverside streets I had ignored, eventually weekends to nearby beaches, small victories of freedom and autonomy. And with each trip, each choice made solely for me, the realization grew. Family isn't always who you share DNA with, it's who shows up when it matters, who acts when it counts. And the people who had abandoned me had failed that test. Occasionally, Mariah and Jason tried again, tentative messages, awkward calls, asking if we could start over. I read them, thumb hovering, and I realized I didn't owe them anything, not trust, not forgiveness, not access to my life. I responded only when I felt safe and calm, firmly, clearly, setting limits that I hadn't been able to enforce before. The kids, small as they were beginning to understand too, seeing that actions mattered more than words, that love without presence isn't love at all. I spent evenings reflecting on the accident, the hospital, the vacation they took without me, on the years of invisible labor, on the exhaustion that had built quietly in my chest, and slowly, slowly, the anger transformed into clarity, the grief into acceptance. I didn't hate them entirely, but I didn't need them to validate my worth. I realized that cutting them off hadn't been cruel, it had been necessary, a protection, a declaration that I would no longer be invisible. The first time I allowed someone fully in after that, a friend who had supported me throughout the hospital and recovery, I noticed the contrast immediately, the difference between care that was assumed and care that was chosen, between obligation and love, and I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. Months passed, routines solidified, my apartment, my life, my choices belonged solely to me. Mariah and Jason tried to meet me halfway several times, each attempt a test of whether their words could match consistent actions, and each time I measured carefully, learning that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the past, it means protecting yourself while evaluating if someone can meet your standards. I wrote in my journal one night, coffee in hand, balcony open to the riverside skyline. I survived abandonment. I survived betrayal, and I am stronger for it. I am clearer, I am empowered. And I meant it, every word. The hospital bed, the vacation, the silence, the confrontation, they had all been lessons I had been forced to learn, and I had, even if the path had been painful. I realized that the story wasn't about them abandoning me, it was about me finding myself in the spaces they left behind, choosing carefully who deserves a place in my life, and valuing myself enough to say no when necessary. I was no longer invisible, no longer taken for granted, and slowly, finally, I began to feel a sense of peace that wasn't dependent on anyone else. The anger still flickered occasionally, like embers, but now it was fuel, not poison, guiding me toward better choices, toward real, earned love, toward people who showed up. And I knew, without doubt, that I would never allow anyone to abandon me again, because I had learned the hard truth. Sometimes the most radical act of love is loving yourself first. It took months, longer than I expected, for the anger to soften, for the betrayal to feel like a memory instead of a wound that throbbed with every thought of them. Mariah and Jason continued their cautious attempts, texts, calls, a message through a mutual friend, but this time I was ready. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past. It didn't mean letting them back into my life on their terms. I invited them to meet, not in my apartment, not in a place I felt trapped, but a neutral cafe, bright but quiet. And for the first time, I saw them as they were, flawed, human, but accountable. I let the silence sit first, heavy, expectant, until Mariah spoke, her voice small. I know we hurt you. We were wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I cut in gently, firmly. No, I want you to understand. I needed you, and you weren't there. That's the reality. You chose convenience over care. You left me alone when I needed you most. That's the part that can't be fixed with words alone." Jason nodded, awkward, shifting, the kids watching nervously, and I realized that confrontation wasn't about punishment, it was about clarity, teaching them that actions matter more than words, that love without presence is hollow. Mariah tried again. "We'll do whatever it takes to make it right," and I looked at her steadily. The first step isn't about doing, it's about understanding, proving you can be there when it counts. Until then, I am protecting myself. My boundaries aren't negotiable. The silence stretched, tense, but I felt the weight lifting inside me, the power of standing firm, of claiming my life back. After years of invisible labor, after the hospital, the vacation, the betrayal, I finally realized that I wasn't cruel for cutting them off. I was human. I was surviving. I had survived being abandoned by the people who should have shown up. I had survived betrayal in the worst possible way, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange, liberating sense of peace. I could breathe without fear. I could live without constantly measuring my worth against their convenience. I returned home that day, the cafe behind me, sun low over Riverside, and for the first time I felt entirely in control of my life, my choices, my presence. I started traveling again, short trips first, then longer ones, alone or with friends who showed up consistently. I reveled in the freedom, in the quiet joy of making decisions that were solely mine. Mariah and Jason continued trying sporadically, but now I had the power to choose, to accept or decline, to engage or step back. I had learned the hard truth. Love yourself first, set boundaries, and only allow those who show up to define your life. Months later, as I stood on the cliffs of La Jolla, wind in my hair, waves crashing below, I thought of that hospital bed, the vacation they took, the betrayal, the years of invisible labor, and I smiled quietly, a smile born of resilience, of clarity, of hard-earned empowerment. I had survived, I had grown, I had reclaimed myself, and I knew that from now on, no one could abandon me without consequence. No one could take my presence for granted. I had learned that family is not automatic. It is chosen, it is shown, it is present. And in that knowledge, I finally found peace, real, unshakable, and mine entirely. But I still wonder, AITA for cutting them off after everything?